When buying a whiskey from the secondary market, you, the buyer, don't know what that whiskey's storage was like beforehand. You're putting some blind trust in the seller. One thing you can check for is fill level. There are various chemical processes that go on inside the bottle over time. There's oxidation, oxidization, evaporation, dissipation. I didn't do particularly well in science in high school. So if you have more interest in an explanation of those processes, I encourage you to seek out someone with an actual science background. Please do not take the word of some random guy on the internet to be the truth. Please do not take the word of some random guy on the internet to be the truth. What is of interest to me is this, the ullage. There used to be whiskey here, and now there's air. What dissipated? What left the bottle? Was it alcohol? Was it water? Was it flavor compounds? The answer is yes to all the above, most likely. Does this taste the same way it did when it was first bottled? No. Does that mean the whiskey is ruined? Not necessarily. I have had plenty of terrible whiskeys with great fill levels and great whiskeys with less than great fill levels. So we're going to find out how these three have turned out. If this was a proper science experiment, I'd have two of these, one with a perfect fill level and this, but then again, I wasn't particularly great at science. First up is this bottle of Knockando 12-year-old, distilled in 1976 and bottled in 1989. Knockando has long been the main malt ingredient in the J&B blends. Now, one would think with this whole foil wrap set up here that the whiskey would have a hard time jumping out of the bottle, but as you can see, that's not the case. It's a cork. Be very careful here. The cork is most likely very broken. And yes, we have a broken cork. I don't see any cork bits. Oh, one cork bit. I think the main culprit for the evaporation and dissipation with this bottle was that cork that was in there. It barely existed by the time I opened it up, which would allow some space for the contents to invisibly slip out over time. Knockando 12 from 1976. It smells good. I'm getting barley and apples. Getting just a little bit of vanilla, but I'm also getting some limes, a little bit of hay. Cheers. It starts out a little troubling at first, but then it gets a lot better. Because first you get sort of this carpet, fabric, synthetic thing. You get just a little bit of honey and just a little bit of brown sugar, but you also get citrus and milk chocolate and stuff like that. And it's the citrus and milk chocolate that stay on the palate the longest. So this was not a fail. Next up is a 21-year-old Highland Park, bottled at 46 ABV by Cadenhead. Cadenhead is an independent bottler, and they have this habit of removing the vintage from a mini when they'll keep the vintage on the full-size bottle of a release. I found that there was one Cadenhead 21-year-old Highland Park bottled at 46% ABV with this style of label in the green glass dumpy bottles. It was distilled in 1966 and bottled in 1988. Time to open it up, and the good news is it's a screw top. I'm fairly excited about 1960s Highland Park. I don't know about you. I'm happy to say that the whiskey is fine. I get oats, I get mangoes, I get this little bit of industrial peat, salty sea air, pears, and yuzu. I dare say this is pretty fantastic. Fantastic on the nose. I have to drink this. Cheers. Chimney soot, this medicinal iodine, toffee, oranges, yuzu, and some other kind of exotic citrus, sea salt, sea air, dried herbs, maybe a touch of sesame oil, gentle peat. This is great. Hold that thought. This screw top was not loose. It was nice and tight. but screw caps are not 100% airtight. Final thoughts on this butte. It beats the living daylights out of contemporary Highland Park. Fantastic. Our final bottle today is Tamdu 10-year-old. Now, Tamdu has gone through at least 4 label changes over the last 40 years. It's almost like a different label every decade. There was one from the 80s, one from the 90s to early aughts, one from the early aughts to the early teens, and then the new branding of it. This was bottled at 40 ABV, so it's technically the lightest of the 3 of these, but it did have the best fill level. Gonna open up this screw top. Here we go. That crack, crack, crack noise was a good sign this was still sealed pretty nicely. Tamdu 10. Another one that still has a vibrant nose, so it didn't lose that part of the whiskey. It does smell like a very simple single malt. Some raw notes to it. You're a little closer to the alcohol here, especially at 10 years old. That's going to happen. But they're also like snickerdoodles and cinnamon sugar cookies. This is a nice little mix of cloves and honey and lemons. Cilantro. Curiously, it has that synthetic note of the Nakando. Similarly, it does dissipate after a couple seconds. Once that tough note goes away, it's very easy drinking. And it's pretty sweet. There's caramel and apples and more caramel and more apples. It does have a good tart note to it, more like really tart apples rather than like limes or lemons. Some final thoughts. The Tamdu 10 is very easy to drink, but that may be due more to the 40% ABV than the fill level issue. One of the things that's becoming clear here is that synthetic note in the Nakando was not due to the cork, because this has it, and this had a screw top. I believe this to be pretty close to the original, so I'm going to call this a not fail. Of these 3 whiskeys, I think the Nakando had the most ill effects of the chemical processes that went on due to the lower fill level. It did have the lowest fill level of the 3, but it also had a cork. I will say that none of these whiskeys were ruined by the chemical processes that brought about their low fill levels. That's not to say that everyone should run out and go and buy minis with low fill levels, but just keep that in mind that slightly dropped fill levels are not deal breakers necessarily. Sometimes they might. One of these could have been terrible. But as always, I urge you to take care, be mindful when you are buying things in the secondary market. As I said at the start, you are putting a lot of faith in the cellar. You don't know how the whiskeys were stored. These 3 whiskeys may have been stored pretty well. That's not necessarily true of all the things you will find in the secondary market. Now, nighttime is falling here in the Ohio River Valley. Papa! Sounds like my time is up.